Mhm.
Now, if I earn $1,000 in the transaction from that one sale, then that's the same thing to say that each person that says no to me, it's worth $100. So every time I make the call and let's say, hi, John, this is Leo calling, and you say no to me, when I hang up the phone, I can say, thank you, John, for the $100. Well, my name is Leo Toledo. I'm the owner CEO of Masterminds Consulting. We are a franchisee of Sandler Training. We are a sales development, sales effectiveness, and sales coaching company. Typically when I work with business owners, what I hear is, Leo, we built a great business, but I'm frustrated because my team doesn't really feel comfortable in prospecting. They don't know how to prospect effectively. Or if that's not a concern, maybe they do a good job in getting in front of opportunities, but then they find themselves perhaps either discounting to bring an opportunity in, or they have to concede uh, terms. And so typically those are the areas that we normally focus on.
Awesome, Leo. Thanks so much for joining us on the Heavy Podcast. How long? Well, tell us a little bit more about your background before what you have been doing before, career path-wise, before you got involved with your current project.
Yeah, thanks. So I come from the roofing background. Originally, I started as inside sales. And then when the leads started slowing down, I quickly adopted the outside sales mentality where I'd have to go out in the field and create my own opportunities. And successfully was the top salesman throughout my tenure in the field. Then uh, I went into the management role. I was running a sales team there for about 3 years. Process, sales strategies, structure, KPI initiatives, and then from there I found Sandler, which it's a sales training organization to integrate into our existing sales process in the company. But when I got exposed, I essentially fell in love with it, and here I am almost 2 years later.
Awesome, man. That sounds exciting, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot that you learned through that process that you're now applying at your current organization, which is really cool. As far as there's one topic that I'm very passionate about. I talk to a lot of my guests on the podcast is around innovation. How do you build that culture of innovation? How do you continuously innovate your products and services? Share with us a little bit more. How does that process work for you and at your company? What are some of the things that, whether you're experimenting or just essentially anything that really helps you continuously improve and evolve when it comes to providing the services for your clients?
Yeah, that's a good question. My thought process behind innovation is being a forward thinker, right? Not being afraid to, change and integrate new technologies that are out to make the customer experience better, to make the customer experience more efficient. I find that if you're not using digital media right now in your sales process, I think you're lagging behind because that's really where our trajectory is going as a business, especially after COVID. Now there's no longer having to drive to a meeting. Now you can interface via remote. So I think using those tools is definitely necessary for what's to come in the future.
Awesome. That's great. And, as far as some strategies that, anything from creative perspective, obviously, you teach sales and, that whole process. And what has helped you in terms of really generate new leads, new contacts, new prospects? How do you go about that on a daily basis? There's a lot of different strategies, but what are the most effective ones that work well for you?
Yeah, that's great. So I'm a big fan of traditional cold outreach. I think cold calling can work because it shows that you're confident enough in your services to create that outbound. Aside from that, I also think that because we're in a digital age, I really feel that branding and brand awareness is on the incline. And what I mean by that is really using video to provide personalized commercials, right? In what you do, how you do it differently, why it's important that your audience knows about you. Because now that we've transitioned to almost 100% digital, people are now seeing a lot of that in the marketplace. And so if you're not investing in video technology, SaaS tools regarding video, then I think you're going to be behind the eight ball.
Interesting. And as far as when it comes to, any pitfalls or any disadvantages or anything that you may want to avoid when it comes to the, sales prospecting or anything that's kind of you coach your clients, share with us anything that's, something basically, anything that needs to be avoided from a perspective of that sales process.
Mm. Yeah, so we have a principle in our sales process that talks about a 70-30 relationship. And really what that means is if you're having a call with an opportunity for an hour, 70% of the time is the prospect or the potential customer doing the talking. And the sales professional, sales representative is doing only 30% of the talking. And that's significant because we find that selling is not telling. Selling is asking, gathering information as a professional as opposed to telling your knowledge, telling why your business is better. Because lots of times what can happen is if you have someone ask you a question and you respond, uh, perhaps your response is not relevant to the reason why they asked you that question.
Got it. Got it. That's
So
interesting.
does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It definitely does make sense. And then from a standpoint of any, trends or ideas that really excite you from kind of from that sales coaching perspective in your industry, what are the different trends you're observing? What are the latest ideas or, innovations that maybe you're very passionate about that you think will be the next kind of the big trend? Share with us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think video messaging is on the rise. Instead of, for example, leaving you a voicemail, I'll leave you a video message mail. So I'll do a 30-second commercial as to the reason and purpose of why I'm reaching out to you, and I'll send you that in a form of a link. And that does two things. One, it allows me to track the response rate from the message, and also it differentiates me because now you're seeing me in the way that I speak, in the way that I you know sell my services, and immediately you can see if I'm being genuine, if I'm being authentic, and I think it's a big differentiator.
Mhm. Yeah, that's very interesting. And in terms of kind of technology and the different tools that you currently use that really help you, expand your sales reach, is there anything that's, out of the traditional tools that you would like to highlight that, may help those who are, struggling from generating sales leads?
Yeah, I think knowing where to find lists. We use in our company Zoom Info. And so Zoom Info is a database where it allows you to segment your target audience, and then they provide you with their email domain, their address, the name of the business owner. We also use LinkedIn Navigator. LinkedIn Navigator is another big resource for us because if I want to target, let's say, the software space from a company that has between 10 and $50 million in revenues, I can easily segment that information in Navigator, and it'll tabulate the list specifically on who the correct target person is. So I'm
Mhm.
a big advocate of that.
And you've seen some good results using some of these tools yourself?
Yes, no, it's to be able to identify the our sales funnel, right? And typically, if it's a cold outreach, you do have to provide several touches before you kind of show any type of interest on their end. So
Mhm.
usually after 5 touches, they say, okay, How can I help you? What is it that your company does? And if someone gives you that opening and share with me what your company does, I typically recommend to call that individual and not respond via email, because that way you can, there's no inflection really in email. So going the extra step and calling them, I think, is a very strong vehicle to differentiating yourself. And similarly, how we ended up in this podcast, if I can share it, I'm very active on LinkedIn, so I posted a video on LinkedIn about, my thought process and beliefs in cold outreach.
Mhm.
And coincidentally, the owner wrote a comment on my video. And when I saw that, I said, okay, well, there's an opportunity for me just to piggyback on the comment that he submitted. And I ended up calling him, and sure enough, we had a 45-minute conversation, very open and welcoming, simply because I made that initiative.
Mhm. That's very
Eh,
interesting. That's a great example of that. And you briefly mentioned, one of the strategies when it comes to cold calling. Um, there's some people may not be comfortable with that when it comes to just calling people out of the blue. What recommendations can you provide to help people kind of get over that hump and deal with rejection? Because when it comes to cold calling, majority of the responses is either no response or it's very short and limited.
mhm.
So what recommendations do you have as far as succeeding when it comes to cold calling or cold reach outs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I learned a long time ago is really putting a dollar amount on someone that says no to you, right? So just for the sake of simple math, if it takes me 10 calls to make one sale, right? That means that I have a 10% success rate in my outreach.
Mhm.
Now, if I earn $1,000 in the transaction from that one sale, then that's the same thing to say that each person that says no to me, it's worth $100. So every time I make the call, and let's say, hi, John, this is Leo calling, and you say no to me, when I hang up the phone, I can say, thank you, John, for the $100. And that's a way of, conditioning your thought process to not being so afraid, because we feel that for every effort that you make in your outreach, you're earning compound interest. So you're getting closer to the yes, because because of the amount of effort that you're trying. So
Mhm. Well, yeah, that's pretty interesting perspective in terms of actually tying some numbers to that. And in terms of any examples that you may have that you consistently use when doing cold calls or cold emails, is there like a particular script that you follow, or is there like a list of, items or particular bullet points that you always, try to have as part of that, initial outreach? Any recommendations there that you would like to highlight that really help you kind of stand out when it comes to picking up the phone and calling, hey, Leo, this is John, and we've never met, but here's what I'm doing. Um,
correct.
Anything that you can highlight from that standpoint?
Yeah, yeah. So what we recommend our clients, the first thing to do is provide what is called the pattern interrupt. And what that really means is when I call, I want to interrupt your natural process or your natural pattern of thinking. And so the way I do that is that, let's say I'm calling you, I'll say, hi, John, this is Leo Toledo. And then I just let the silence kind of continue. And immediately you're thinking, okay, well, who is Leo Toledo? Do I know him? Have I heard this name before? And then typically you'll respond with, okay, yes, Leo, how can I help you? And then I usually say, look, John, we don't know each other, but I probably caught you right in the middle of something.
Hmm.
You see, because what ends up happening is that if you don't know me, and then you say, yes, Leo, how can I help you? And I go into the reason why I called, all of a sudden I'm talking over you, right? I'm assuming that what I'm going to respond with is applicable to you. So before I even introduce the reason why I'm calling, I ask you for your permission to say, well, first, before I tell you why I called, I probably caught you in the middle of something, right? So if you say to me, yes, you did, then I deflect and say, okay, well, when would be a better time for me to call you back, right? And then that way, you see, because that's how we communicate. I ask you first before I proceed.
Right.
Now, if you say, no, yes, well, look, I have a few minutes. How can I help you? Then I segue into, well, before I tell you the reason for my call, let me ask you, you don't happen to have a sales team in your company, do you? Because I'm calling specifically to train their salespeople and their sales management, right? That's why I'm calling.
Mhm.
So if I call and I don't ask if they have a sales team, and then I give my commercial and me working with sales teams, after I finish, he's going to say, well, I don't have a sales team. We lost rapport. We lost our communication bonding. So the call is dropped. But if he does say, yes, I do have a sales team, now I know that when I give my commercial, it could be applicable because he has a sales team.
Very interesting. Um, what I'm also curious about is when someone does pick up the phone as part of that cold call, like you've mentioned, and you actually say that in your script that, hey, I probably caught you in the middle of something. I'm sure you were busy, you were whatever, but yet you answered. Um, what type, what, how do you deal with that rejection initially when the respondent says, yes, I'm in the middle of something, I'm very busy, kind of, what do you need, or how can I help? And in order to keep that super quick, obviously they try to get off the phone because they don't want to be rude, but they also in the middle of something. What's kind of, how do you change that, the kind of the flow of that conversation when when you encounter something like that?
Yeah, well, I want to be on their side,
Mm.
right? See, the aspect of selling and what typically happens when you're not aware is that sales professionals think that it's a me versus you engagement. It's me versus John, right? And the way that we sell is that you shift from me versus John to me and John. So it's we together resolving an issue together, right? So if you say to me, Leo, you caught me in the middle of something, well, forgive me, obviously that happened because I called you unannounced. So what do you think we should do? You see, because now when I invite, so what do you think we should do? Now it's not me against you, it's we collectively coming up with a game plan for next step, if there is a next step.
Right, right, right. Yeah, very interesting. And I'm pretty sure there's all kinds of different variations of that, how to deal with different scenarios. So I appreciate you sharing some of the kind of the insights of how at least you deal with some of that. When sales, sales is king. Sales is everything. Without sales, every business is nothing. It's one of the most important elements of the business growth and all of that. Well, we all know that. For
Mhm.
the for the for the folks that are not necessarily sales trained or sales aptitude, but they're trying to get over that particular hump or get better at sales, what would you recommend for them? Like, what would be the initial step? How do you actually take that and say, let's say I was a software engineer and I'm not a sales guy by nature, but yet I do need to sell my product. What are the initial strategies that really help kind of hit the ground running from that very beginning? What do you recommend there?
Right. That's a good question. So, one of the things that we train is to say, okay, if I'm a software engineer and I produce these software products, what do my products solve? What are the problems that my product solves, right? And that makes it you have to be very clear on 1 to 2 to 3 specific areas that these areas, that are the troubling areas on what your software solves. So if, for example, I'm calling someone or I have a meeting with someone and I want to know how to sell my software, I'll typically start with typically the areas of which my software solves are problem 1, problem 2, problem 3. Are any of those areas or problems happening in your world that is worth it for you and I to have a conversation about it? And if they say, yes, problem one or problem two, instead of saying, okay, well, here's how we fix it, you then just ask a simple clarifying question. Well, help me understand, why is that happening in your business? Because the key for professional and successful selling is knowing the reasons or the motives behind the meeting. And so, for example, if you're a sales development rep and you get inbound leads, what you want to do to be successful is don't try to run to the close. Ask questions on, well, why did you call us to begin with? What are the areas that are troubling you that led you to call my company? And how do you think my company could handle those issues? You see, I want to know the expectation before I say how we can help you.
Gotcha. Interesting. And when yeah, especially I'm pretty sure one of the biggest challenges as part of kind of that sales process is getting to the right decision makers, and speaking to the right person who is actually capable of making that decision, or helping you to get to that next level. What are your
Mhm.
recommendations when it comes to, as part of that sales process, really get in front of the right decision makers? What
Right.
can help me, I guess, on that same example, as I'm a software engineer, I built a really cool product, and now I just got to get to the right, in front of the right people who will make that decision as far as purchasing power, or get engaged with the services that I provide. What are your
Mhm.
recommendations there?
Yeah, so typically, if that example exists in our conversation, I would usually say something like, in my past experience, when I get in front of an opportunity like this, my experience has led me to believe this is the process on how they make decisions. Is that similar here? So what I do there is that I'm using a third party reference or a past experience on a successful experience, and then correlating into asking a question, is that how you guys make decisions here? Right? Which is very different than me asking directly, how do you guys make decisions? Because it can be misinterpreted as being too abrasive, right? But if I say, well, my past clients, the way that we've been able to implement our software successfully, this is how they made decisions. Is that similar to how you make decisions?
Mhm.
And then now what I've done is that I've segued my past successful experience to this present experience, and then they'll walk me through. So they can say something like, well, that's not the way we do it. We do it like this. And then now you know how they do it.
Mhm.
So really what you're trying to find out is how they make their decision criteria, because not every company that we offer our software products to makes decisions the same way. So before I can ask you directly, how do you make decisions? I try to compare a past experience and I bring that into the conversation and then ask, how do you guys compare to that experience?
Mhm. That's interesting. Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. I mean, if you try to tie that particular need to what need that they're experiencing as far as any painful process or problem that they solving for their customers, that makes perfect sense. Um, so, and I guess from a different perspective, I guess, Leo, what are your sources for learning? How do you get better at sales yourself? How do you improve your sales strategies? What is your what does that look like? What do you consume? What is your content diet from that perspective?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So in our world, success is defined by three pillars in sales, right? Now you can apply these principles in really every area of life, but specifically for sales, it's behaviors, attitude, and technique, right? So the behavior aspect is, okay, what am I supposed to do daily? What are the areas, what are my KPI initiatives in terms of a behavior standpoint? Is it outreaching cold? Is it following up on my existing account managers? Is it my vendor relations? Is it making those calls, nurturing the relationship? So those are the behaviors that have to be consistent, whatever your monetary or financial goals are.
Mhm.
Then the other pillar is your attitude towards the profession, your attitude or your belief system within yourself. Do you believe that your price, if it's more expensive, it's worth it? Or do you believe that you have to concede or discount in order for you to make a sale? So
Mhm.
a lot of the attitudinal aspect of selling, in my opinion, it's the most important. It's how you feel, because when you're talking to someone, they're sensing the feeling, they're not really sensing what you're saying. And then the third component is the technique, which is, okay, how are you making the call? How are you structuring the beginning of the sales call? How do you structure your presentation, right? Do you just present and do demos just because someone asked you? Or do you have a strategy, a technique to deliver it appropriately?
Mhm.
So
Interesting.
from those three areas, that's how we feel that success in sales is at the very height.
Got it. Got it. Got it. And last but not least, what are the different sales books or sales, I don't know, blogs that you recommend to others? What have you read lately that really stood out? Or maybe there's a sales book that you always recommend to others, and why is that? Share with us some recommendations, please.
Yeah, the book that I recommend for sales is How to Teach a Kid to That You Can't Teach a Kid to Ride a Bike at a Seminar by David Sandler. And really, what it talks about is that for you to become a professional in selling, you need practice, right? You cannot go into a seminar, a 2-day workshop, and expect to be transformed in the way you sell, right? Because we know that when we go into new information after 2 days, we practically lose what we learned.
Mhm.
So continuing the practice or the reinforcement piece of sales process,
Mhm.
that's what that book specifically talks about and why it's so advantageous.
Oh, that's awesome. I love the title of the book. It's definitely already catchy. And for our listeners, we'll make that title and the link to the book available in the episode notes. Leo, last but not least, before we close out, how do our folks find you? How do they get a hold of you if they want to get in touch?
Sure. They can send me an email. That's l.toledo@sandler.com. They can also ring me at my cell, 305-219-0801. They can follow my page on LinkedIn, LinkedIn/sales tidbits, and they can see all the content that I post regularly about sales strategies, and things that you can implement for you to increase your income.
That's awesome. Leo, thanks so much for your time today. I know it was a very short conversation, but a lot of great strategies. I appreciate the kind of sharing some of, parts of your secret sauce when it comes to, the sales strategies and sales training. So definitely much appreciated. We're going to stay in touch. Perhaps we're going to do another episode, next year or so and see how much have changed.
Great. I appreciate that. Thank you for your time.